So every example that I've given so far is pretty dour, right? It's about how cooperation falls apart. That's not necessarily what's always happening, right? Nash equilibrium does not necessarily lead us to the best outcome, right? This is clearly better than that one. But it doesn't necessarily always lead us to the worst outcome either, right? It's just, it is a prediction about a game. It's not necessarily always a doom prediction. So let's do another example. Let's say that you and a friend are going to meet together for lunch, but you've both forgotten where you're going to meet. You know it was either going to be IHOP or Whole Foods. Both your phones are dead, so you cannot contact each other. So you and your friend just sort of have to figure out where you are going to go without talking to each other. So how can we figure out where to go for lunch? What's our Nash equilibrium going to be? Well, you know that you prefer IHOP, but your friend prefers Whole Foods, right? And also that your friend prefers Whole Foods so much that if they had to choose, she'd rather be there alone than at Whole Foods with you, right? Oh, than at IHOP with you, that should say. So let's write out our game table. Okay. So we again have two choices, or sorry, we have two players. We have you and your friend. You each have two options. You can either go to Whole Foods or you can go to IHOP, and we have our payouts. So your friend really loves Whole Foods. So if you both end up at Whole Foods, that's great. You know, you get 2, they get 4. If you go to Whole Foods, they go to IHOP, but that's everybody at their least favorite restaurant. Nobody gets anything. But if you go to IHOP, which is your place, they go to Whole Foods, which is their place, you're not together, at least you're at your own places. You get nothing, but they get 2. And then finally, if you both go to IHOP, they really don't like IHOP. They're going to only get 1. You're going to get 3. So based on these payouts, we can predict what we think is going to happen in this game. Let's draw this out and figure out our Nash equilibrium. Got you, got friend, got Whole Foods, and we've got IHOP, Whole Foods, IHOP. Got 2 for you, got 4 for the friend, 0 for you, 2 for the friend, 0 for you, 0 for the friend, 3 for you, and 1 for the friend. All right, let's figure out our Nash equilibrium by figuring out the best responses. So first, if we think that your friend is going to go to Whole Foods, our best response, what's our best response? We could go to Whole Foods and we'll get 2. We could go to IHOP and get 0. 2 is better than 0. I'm going to circle the 2. Note about this, notice that I only compared our numbers. When I was considering our best response, the friend's payouts did not matter at all, right? None of this is about like trying to make the other person worse off, right? It's you just care about your own payoffs. If you care at all about the other person's payoffs, then you've already incorporated that into whatever numbers on the board, right? So this is all very self-centered, I guess you could call it, right? You're not trying to hurt the other person. You're not trying to help the other person. You're just following the incentives that you have. So we don't care about this 4. We don't care about this 2. We just are comparing this 2 up here that we get from going to Whole Foods when they're at Whole Foods against this 0 down here, which is what we get when they go to Whole Foods and we go to IHOP. Think about the best response if they go to IHOP. If they go to IHOP, then we either go to Whole Foods and get 0, or we go to IHOP and get 3. Clearly 3 is better than 0, so that's going to be our best response there. Flipping it around, what's your friend want to do? Well, if you go to Whole Foods, they can either go to Whole Foods as well and get 4. They can go to IHOP and get 0. 4 is better than 0. And then if you go to IHOP and they go to Whole Foods, if you go to IHOP, they can either go to Whole Foods and get 2, IHOP and get 1. So 2 is better than 1. So that's their best response there. So the Nash equilibrium that we would predict for this game is that you're both going to end up at Whole Foods. And if you think out this strategic game before, you would know to go to Whole Foods to meet your friend even without having to contact. I have another example. Here's a generic game. It doesn't have a story behind it. It's just a table. So also note, we don't have the same options here. I can go up or down. You can go left or right. That's fine. You don't necessarily have to have, the game doesn't necessarily have to be symmetrical. We're both choosing between the same thing. So based on this table, how can we find the Nash equilibrium? What's going to be the Nash equilibrium? Head on the next item. So well, let's do the same thing we've always done. What if we think our friend's going to go left? We can go up and get 2, down and get 0. 2 is better than 0. We circle that. If we think they're going to go right, we can go up and get 0, down and get 1. 1 is better than 0. We circle that. If they think we're going to go up, they can go left and get 2, right and get 0. 2 is better than 0. We circle that. Now we've got both of these circled right here. If they think we're going to go down, they can go left and get 0, right and get 1. 1 is better than 0. We circle both of these. right there. So in this case, we actually have two Nash equilibria, right? Where there's two possible outcomes where in each case, neither of us would want to change what we're doing. Remember, the Nash equilibrium, we're both playing best response to each other at the same time, which means neither of us can make ourselves better off by changing what we do. And this is true, even though this one is clearly better than this one, right? They're still both Nash equilibrium. Now, in this case, it's probably pretty easy to get everybody to agree to go up here rather than down here. But still, they are still both Nash equilibrium. So why do we care? Why does it matter, this whole concept of Nash equilibrium? I mean, clearly, this is one way of finding out what people are going to do in a game, but we could have other theories as well. So why do we care about Nash equilibria as particularly interesting? Well, because it tends to work. It tends to be a pretty good way of predicting what people are going to do in a game. In a lot of lab experiments, you can show that if you let people play a game for a while that has a Nash equilibrium, they don't necessarily start there right away, but they'll find their way there. And this happens across a lot of different types of games. It happens very consistently. It's a very consistent finding in social science that a lot of games tend towards the Nash equilibrium. Not every single game. There are some exceptions. We'll talk about those later. But most of the time. We also call it equilibrium because it's a sticky thing, right? We sort of once you get to it, nobody has any reason to switch what they're doing, right? Even if everyone can see that there's a better way, which sort of tells you something about what you might have to do to get out of a bad situation. Imagine we kept playing this game over and over again, right? We kept getting the cooperations going down, the defections going up. Eventually, we'd be in a place where everybody's over here, right? And now everybody could talk to the classroom and say, hey, classroom, what are we doing? We're down here, we're defecting with each other. We'd all be better off if we were up here cooperating, right? But if just you try to defect, if you try to go back to cooperating to try to fix that, you're just going to lose out, right? So is anybody else who tries to get out, right? So there's not really an ability for individuals to get out of that sticky spot. Yeah.
Played this game in my political science class, like to simulate international relations.
Yep.
And people did try to do the cooperating thing, like it'll be better for both of us, and I just affect it every time.
Yeah, because it's in your interest to do so, right? Yeah. So it's hard to keep the cooperation going, which tells you something about what you need to do in this situation if you did want cooperation, right? If it's really important that we get to this cooperation outcome, then you know that at least you got to change what the game is, right? So it gives you a clue as to where you can go, right? So knowing what the Nash equilibrium is at least tells you that you can't get out of it with just change people's individual behavior alone, because people's individual behavior is always going to be pushed towards that equilibrium. The other cool thing about Nash equilibrium is that wherever you start, right? If you happen to be in a room where everybody started cooperating, eventually people would figure it out and they sort of migrate down here. This is true even if we're brainless. This is a completely automatic process. As long as you get feedback on your choices and you try to, get better points, it will always lead you towards the Nash equilibrium. Computers will play Nash equilibrium if trained to try to do well in a game. They will naturally find it out because the game is set up such that if you get feedback and you improve your play based on that feedback, well, that's the improved play right there, right? Is getting to the Nash equilibrium, at least on an individual level. Even animals play Nash equilibria. This can be shown pretty clearly. It's something called evolutionary game theory, sort of an offshoot. So it's sort of the animal version of a prisoner's dilemma. It's what's called the hawk-dove game. And this is a bit more complex because the animals aren't really so much choosing what to do as evolving to act in a certain way. So it's a bit more complex, but the same idea holds, right? Let's imagine two animals meet in the woods. There's some food there. Who's going to go for the food, right? Are you going to try to share the food with the other animal who's approaching it in the woods? Are you going to try to fight them for it? Right. So you can be evolved in two different ways. You can either be a hawk who's about to fight for that food, or you can be a dove who's just going to sort of try to share what you found. So what happens we have our two players, two different animals who are meeting. We have the two different ways you can be evolved, hawk or dove. What are our payouts? Well, if two hawks meet, they both fight and they both get half. So half the time you win, half the time you lose. On average, you get half of whatever you found. But also you get scratched up and probably damaged from the fight, which isn't good. Everybody's a dove, you both get half as well, but you shared it, right? So you walk away without getting hurt. You also, on average, get half of the end, whatever food it is that you found. But if one of you is a hawk and one of you is a dove, then the hawk wins, right? So even though it would be better if both the animals happen to be doves than if both happen to be hawks, because in both cases you get half the animal on average, but over here you have to fight for it, you probably get hurt. It's still the Nash equilibrium to be a hawk, because if they're a dove, then you'd rather be the hawk. If they're a dove, you'd rather be the hawk because then you get all the food. If they're a hawk, then you'd rather be a hawk as well, because getting the food half the time is better than walking away with nothing.